All right, we're about to do an interview I've been looking forward to since the beginning of the Last Dance documentary, certainly since they focused on Michael Jordan and the Bulls' rivalry with the Detroit Pistons. All right, let's go out to New York and bring in Isiah Thomas. Just for transparency, Isiah Thomas is one of my favorite human beings on the planet. I just want to establish that up front. I probably got a little bit of bias here, but not really. I'm going to keep it real. Isiah, thank you for joining us. We heard during this documentary, 10-part documentary, Michael Jordan called you an asshole, said that he hates you, has animus over the lack of a handshake and the supposed lack of respect. We know how Michael Jordan feels about you. How do you feel about Michael Jordan?
First of all, I was shocked to hear that from him because he and his producer, they actually approached me to sit down and do the interview for The Last Dance. And, you know, we went back and forth in terms of timing and place and finally settled on doing the interview. And, you know, I got from his producer that they wanted me to be involved and I chose to be involved. And I didn't know that this is what was coming because, you know, he and I had been to dinner before. He, Amar Rashad, and I had been to dinner before. We've seen each other in different places at NBA functions, and I never got any type of animosity or bad feelings from him towards me. So I don't have any bad feelings towards Michael Jordan, or have I ever had any bad feelings towards Michael Jordan. So I'm like me and my family who sat down to watch The Last Dance. We were pretty surprised to hear those words come out of his mouth, especially since it was following, an apology that I had given to him on national television.
You kind of answered this question, so you don't have to spend long on it, but was there anything that transpired off the court between you and Michael that may fuel this level of animus 30 years down the road?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, really, I think the only thing that people kind of go back to is, and I've said this, the lapse in judgment that I had, in terms of not shaking his hand after a game. Just to contextualize that and give you the full narrative around that, before that, they won, I think it was after game 3, Michael Jordan called us undeserving champions and said that, we were bad for basketball and everything else. Now, we had a long, hard journey to become champions. We had to fight through Boston. We had to fight through L.A. And we had a lot of ups and downs, just like every champion does. And we felt that we deserved our championship and worked hard to get it. And to have him say that we were undeserving, that really did cut, and it cut deep. So when we got beat and we got swept and they won, they beat us 4-0. A lot went into that. First we were celebrating with each other, thanking each other for our journey. But then the decision was made. Lambeer said, hey, let's, we just gonna, walk off. And that's what we did. Now, was it the right thing to do? Probably not, looking back 30 years later. But what went into that in terms of our emotions, the way the city was feeling at that time, for someone to call us undeserving in terms of what we had been through, at that particular moment, we didn't feel that they deserved a handshake either. So now, was that the right thing to do, looking back 30 years from now? No, it wasn't. We should have been bigger as champions, and I should have been bigger as a person to really stop and ignore the noise that had come after game 3 and did the right thing. And I apologize for that. I did it. I'm doing it now, and I did it back then too. So I don't know why he has that type of animosity that he's exhibited. He seems to be angry at a lot of people right now.
I would agree. He seems to be a guy that holds a grudge as well. And I'm just wondering if this could be a competitive thing because People don't realize this, but you're only 1 year older than Michael Jordan. You entered the league before him, but you're really only 1 year older. And during the 1980s, when you were in your prime, in the 1980s, before you hurt your wrist, before you got on the other side of your career, you were pretty dominant over Michael Jordan. 32-16 in the 1980s in the regular season and postseason. Could this just be a competitive thing from you and the Pistons beating up on him, wins and losses?
It could be from his point of view. And by the way, that number should be 37-16, including playoffs. And so Michael Jordan at that time, from 84 to 90, in 91, I had basically what they would call career-ending wrist surgery. And, I never was the same again. But when we were all young and healthy, from 84 to 90, the numbers speak for themselves. He wasn't really my competition. My competition was Bird and Magic, trying to catch the Celtics, trying to catch the Lakers. Chicago at that time, and Jordan at that time, from 84 to 90, before my wrist surgery, he just, that wasn't my competition.
Let's stay there for a minute. In the 80s, because he didn't have tremendous success against you, Magic, or Larry. But then, once you guys started to come down the hill somewhat, you saw his ascension and dominance. Is that how you guys felt?
Well, and that's a natural progression of the champion and of teams throughout the league. I mean, when Boston was at their absolute best, we gave them competition, but they were better than us. I mean, and as they got older, as they got a little bit more banged up, we were able to catch them. Now, what we were able to learn from Boston during that process, the Detroit Pistons, and every time you hear us talk about who we are, what we became, we do not mention ourselves as champions without saying the Boston Celtics, because those were our teachers. Those were our mentors. Those are the people that really taught us how to win, and they gave us the heartaches. And Bird, McHale, DJ, Ainge, Max, ML Carr, they were great to us as teachers. And when we got to go to the finals and finally beat them, then I ran into another one of my mentors, which was Magic Johnson, who had let me become a student under him, learning how to win championships in the NBA, learning that Laker organization, learning that Celtic organization. And I'm sure all of you can look back and remember, you saw me at every NBA Finals game when the Celtics and the Lakers were playing. And not only was I there as a fan, but I was there as a student, taking notes, learning how to win, how to put together an organization, and not just be a basketball player in the NBA, but to become a champion. And that's what we became. We became a champion, and we were pretty dominant in our era.
And yesterday, during an ESPN interview, Horace Grant accused Michael Jordan of being dishonest in the documentary. Do you think the documentary portrayed you and the Pistons honestly?
This is a question that I think I would hope people would one day go back and watch the games that the Pistons played, that we actually played in, because the narrative about us over the last, 20 plus years has been, you take a couple of clips of some hard fouls, and then you say, okay, this is Detroit Pistons. You take a couple of movie clips, and then you put some words around it, and you say, this is the Detroit Pistons. No, that was part of us, but that was also part of the NBA. And as a matter of fact, that was part of the Chicago Bulls, too. I mean, Charles Oakley, who people say probably is the toughest player and the toughest person to ever come through the NBA. Well, guess what? He was a teammate of Michael Jordan's, okay? Horace Grant was a teammate of Michael Jordan. Bill Cartwright, those guys were tough people. So it wasn't like, we just came in and bullied them and beat them up. Okay, well, they bullied us and beat us up too. I got some scars on my head from Bill Cartwright. I got some blood coming down my eyes. Just as much as Jordan got hit, I got hit just as hard. We didn't complain about it. That was just part of the game. You see Robert Parrish knocking Lambier's head off in a playoff game. We got up, we played the next game. I mean, that's just how it was then. But, so this narrative about the Pistons were so rough and tough and everybody was so soft, so they had to legislate the game because the Pistons were beating everybody up. Time out. That's not quite how I remember.
You anticipate seeing Michael Jordan at some point and clearing the air of why he would hate you 30 years later?
So first of all, there's no air to clear from my point of view because I genuinely don't have anything against him, nor did I ever. I'm not that kind of guy. I played out on the floor, in between the four lines, and I'm okay with saying, the time that we competed when we were both young and healthy, and he didn't have injuries and I didn't have injuries. I'm pretty confident in saying, my record was pretty dominant against him and against his team, and in terms of my team. Now, outside of the four lines, I got nothing I got nothing but love and respect for the brother in terms of, who he is, what he's done, and what he's accomplished. We as former players, current players, we owe a great deal of debt to Michael Jordan and LeBron James, because what those two have done for our league and our game financially and raised it to another level, it's been great for all of us. We get to be on this show and talk basketball 24/7, 365 during COVID because of what, Jordan has done and what LeBron has done. So, we as a collective family, brotherhood, so forth and so on, I believe in that. And that's what I live by and go by. So I don't have anything against the brother. Now, if he puts on number 23 and I put on number 11, okay, yeah, we're going to go compete. But outside of that, that's all it was for me.
You mentioned the importance of Michael Jordan in terms of elevating the league. That, to me, says that the league had a major investment in Michael Jordan. David Stern and the whole league, they poured all their chips into Michael Jordan. He was the establishment. You, as the head of the Players Union during your playing career, you went head-to-head with David Stern and the league. Real battles that you did pretty well in. Did you know at the time that you were taking on the establishment the way that you were and that it would define your post-career the way that it has?
Absolutely, we did. Not only myself, but the Detroit Pistons as a small market and what we stood for in the game of basketball at that particular time. Because at that particular time, no small market team had ever dominated the way we were dominating. It was always Boston, LA, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Those were the four big markets that the league wanted to promote. And we as a Players Association and players knew that it helped when those four markets were doing well, that the league does well. Now, what we were able to do as a small market team is to create the next generation for a San Antonio Spurs to happen. Because the San Antonio Spurs, what they became is really, the fast forward or uptick of what the Pistons were in Detroit. Small markets team, dominating, so forth and so on. The other thing that we were able to do we were the first team to experiment with changing our colors. We were the first team, we went to the silver and black, the Raider colors, because we met Al Davis after Pat Riley wouldn't give me no ice after I sprained my ankle, game 6. We had to go to the Raiders facility to train to try to heal up. But, so we took on the silver and black. Mike Ornstein gave us the Raider logos and everything else. So we started playing with our colors. not only did we start playing with our colors while I was the president of the Players Association moving forward, then we started upgrading our hotel. So instead of staying at, the 3-star hotels, we upgraded and went to the 5-star hotels. We changed our travel. We were the first team to get our own private plane and start moving around the league. So that, of course, we knew we were attacking the establishment, and the establishment didn't like what we were doing and what we were representing, not only as team, but also as players. The things that we were talking about in terms of race, class, and gender that was coming out of our Pistons organization, that was coming out of, our interviews, the discourse that we put out into the public, we were very, against not against, but forward thinking in terms of where the league was going and where we thought the league should be. And when you ask me, did I know that we was going against the establishment? So that question is absolutely yes. And by the way, we saw Michael Jordan as part of us, as a union, as a players group. And by the way, all those guys that they said don't like me, they voted me to be their president and represent them. But Michael Jordan was, at that time, we were getting 53% of the gross. So when we looked at Michael Jordan, not only did we look at him as a great basketball player and someone who was elevating the league, but we also looked at him as 53% of the gross. So he was one of us, and he was helping uplift the league. So my job as the president was to make sure that we kept the 53 cents on the dollar, and the owners kept 47. Well, at that time, they wanted a little bit more, and we fought and battled. And I'll say, most of the battles, when I was president of the union and vice president of the union, we won most of our battles at the negotiating table. If not
Isiah,
all.
final question before we go to commercial break, and we'll come back with some more questions. But if you could answer this in 60, 90 seconds, and take as long as you want. Michael Jordan called y'all bad for basketball before sweeping y'all. Listening to what you just said about the league and his importance and elevating, could you understand why David Stern and perhaps the league thought the Pistons were bad for basketball? Because y'all were standing in the way of Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I can understand the way that they were thinking it, probably in the league office, because monetarily, as we've seen, this is a business too. And you definitely, while the Pistons were making money and the bad boys were making money, in the 80s, the highest rated games in the 80s, Pistons versus Celtics, Pistons versus Chicago, Pistons versus Lakers. They have one thing in common, the Detroit Pistons. So the highest rated games in the 80s were the games that we played in. The merchandise that was selling at that time, bad boy Piston merchandise, people were wearing it everywhere. And then when you look at the crowds that we were bringing in at that time, we were putting, 40, 50, 60,000 people in the Silver Dome. So what we were doing energetically and also what we were doing from a financial standpoint, we were bringing more people to the game. Now, what league office understood is that Jordan in Chicago being a bigger market than Detroit, Jordan having a Nike behind him that was moving into marketing, those connections and those two together definitely, elevated him in our league, in us as players, to another level. So I do understand the business aspect of it.
Yeah, we're going back, man. And I loved how you said your wars with the Boston Celtics helped you guys as the Detroit Pistons on your journey. Now, I want to know, do you feel that you and the Pistons going to battle with Michael Jordan has helped Michael Jordan become what he was and what he is?
That's for him to speak to. I can only really tell you about my journey and who my teachers and mentors were and what I learned from losing and what I learned from them, and give them credit for it. You know, he has to speak for his journey, and he speaks for himself. And I can tell you who, you know, Magic and Bird and Julius Erving definitely helped make me the champion that I became in the NBA. The Lakers and the Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers definitely helped shape the Detroit Pistons into becoming the champions that we became as a basketball team.
Okay, here's one that I know you can answer, and it's going to be in your words, and I want to go deep to the heart. Do you feel that Michael Jordan had no role in you making the dream team? Be real.
You know, up until the Last Dance, I didn't think he did. You know, and I took him at his word. But now listening to him and Rod Thorne and how they portrayed me, and you know, I kind of question it now. you got to question it. You know, but up until then, you know, up until I guess last week, I hadn't laid that card on him. Nor had I laid it on anyone. But just watching a documentary and seeing how he and Rob were talking and communicating, there's, you know, I guess he said, I guess in his words, having me around would have made him feel uncomfortable. So,
Isiah, one of the observations I had watching this documentary that kind of took me by surprise is like, I started thinking like Isiah and Larry Bird are more alike than Isiah and Magic Johnson, Isiah and Michael Jordan. You and Larry come from tough, hard knock backgrounds. Michael and Magic come from nuclear, middle-class families. They're kind of corporate and glitzy. You and Larry Bird, kind of lunch pail, rough competitors. Has that ever crossed your mind that it's like you and Larry actually have more in common than Michael and Magic?
You know, and then we you know, both, he played at Indiana State, I played at Indiana. You know, definitely there's a lot of commonality there. And Larry and I have always had a great relationship. And whenever we got out on the floor, you know, you can see in the All-Star games, like he and I, we just magically connected and always, you know, found each other. And when the, you know, the whole thing that in terms of competing against the Celtics and watching our team grow, you know, Larry, Kevin, Dennis Johnson, and ML Carr, them guys were constantly, you know, doing the exhibition season, you know, even though they would be shooting, you know, little jabs at you, but they was always letting you know, you're getting closer, you're getting closer. And I'll never forget the first time Larry played against Dennis Rodman, we were in Hartford, Connecticut. We had just drafted Dennis and we were playing down in Hartford. And I told Larry, when they were getting off the bus, I said, I got something for you this year. This guy Rodman, you know, he can defend. And Larry's like, nah, we'll see when we get out on the court. So this exhibition game, we like talking trash, so forth and so on. Anyway, they end up beating us in Hartford. But as we're getting on the bus, he looks at me and he goes, y'all got two nice rookies. And he was talking about Rodman and Sally. So every now and then they would let us know that we were on our way.
The other observation I had was the feud between you and Jordan just comes down to city kid versus suburban kid. Your thoughts?
So I'm going to call timeout on the feud because really, I wasn't fighting him. I was winning all the time. I was winning the majority of the time. So why am I mad at him?
Woo, at least okay, that competitor came out.
Yeah, at that point in time. Yeah, of course, we're all competitors. I mean, all of you have played, right? You know, we play different sports, football, basketball, but absolutely we competitors. And the guy who's winning all the time or most of the time, you ain't mad at nobody. You're kind of happy.
As the last dance, Doc, I think it was a good look for you. Do you agree? Overall, I think it's a good look for you.
I think for the Detroit Pistons and also historians of the game, because what the last dance has done, it has really allowed the younger generation to really go back and take a critical look and critique the actual history of the game and recognize some players and some play that they may have overlooked. I mean, all 1990 NBA Finals, and all 1989 NBA Finals, they talk about small ball being a new thing and dominating the NBA. Well, I think what people have discovered is that in 1989, Joe Dumars, small shooting guard, was the MVP of the finals. 1990, Isiah Thomas, point guard, small point guard, MVP of the NBA Finals. And then when you look at our three-point shooting ability during 89 and 90 and where we had evolved to as a basketball team and what Bill Laimbeer was as a three-point shooting center, you know, we still hold records from the three-point line in the NBA Finals in terms of field goal percentage. Now, fast forward to 2020 that we're in now, when everyone was talking about, oh, the game has evolved. I think what Last Dance has brought them back to from an offensive standpoint is like more teams play like the Detroit Pistons now, and more point guards play like Isiah Thomas and Joe Dumars now than they were back then. So the impact and influence that we've had on the game is starting to be recognized now, because I would venture to say there in the NBA right now, there's more backcourts like Dumars and I than there are like, you know, Pippen and Jordan. And I'll say, and let me just say this, I don't mean that as a slight. I mean that because Pippen and Jordan were such freaks as athletes that it's very difficult to find a Pippen and a Jordan with that type of athleticism that you can put out on the floor together. It's easier to find an Isiah and a Dumars and make a team. Athletically, what Pippen and Jordan were together out on the floor, those two are rare, and they show up every 60 years or so.
Now, you speak to influence. Has the success of the documentary, has that made you want to go out there and do the Isiah Thomas documentary?
You know, there's a time, there'll be a book and there'll be a doc at the right time. And my story is it's a pretty interesting story from a basketball standpoint. Growing up on the west side of Chicago, activism, sports, education, and just coming from where I came from and representing what I represent. I hope people will find it interesting when it happens.
Yeah, I got to tee this one up for you because, listen to Whitlock all the time. He loves you. He's a champion for you. I love you as well, Zeke. But he argues that the media has been unfair to you based on this documentary as well. This is a bad portrayal of you. So can you clear up what's the biggest misconception you've gotten from this documentary?
I don't know. I mean, I look at it and I, how can I say this? I mean, there's I guess Walt Whitman, I think, wrote the poem, and he used the words "vast with multitudes." And I do have multitudes in terms of as a person that plays played basketball inside the four lines. And then there's a person that's outside of the four lines. And too many times people want to say that the way you competed and the way you played is the person that you are. And those are different things. And I don't live my life the way I play basketball. That's just not who I am. Now, I did have a personality as a basketball player, but I also have a personhood as a human being outside of the four line. And so I would say the multitudes that I carry, I've always tried to extend and be the best in those multitudes of lanes that I had to live in and be judged and critiqued in. So that's the best way I can really answer that question without, getting too far out, which I probably did in answering the question.
Isiah, we're gonna end on this note. We had this discussion last week, and I wanted to ask you. We found an irony that basically Michael Jordan is being celebrated in this documentary for his bullying tactics towards his teammates. But somehow you and the Pistons are villainized because the bad boys allegedly bullied opponents. Do you find that fascinating, interesting, bothersome?
Well, I find it interesting and fascinating that the language and the labels that have been extended and put on the Pistons as a team, those same labels as teammates, the Bulls, put on each other. So, and just watching the doc, I'm surprised that, there seemed to be a lot of, dysfunction or dislike within their team. But I guess that speaks to, how great a player Jordan was to overcome all that and still win championships and be this dominant.
So Michael Jordan was able to overcome himself and still win championships. I won't put words in your mouth, but that's my takeaway.
I can only speak for the Pistons, and I can only tell you what I'm observing, what I'm hearing from their teammates about each other, which is, interesting.
Isiah, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the context. Look, I've been on the record. I'm a Michael Jordan fan after this documentary.
I am too.
Horace Grant.
53% pros.
Yeah. I'm starting to back off a little bit, though. It's just Michael Jordan, a very complicated soul. And he needs to let this damn grudge go. He owes you an apology. You were man enough to give him an apology. To sit there right before sweeping y'all and talking about y'all were bad for basketball. How the hell were y'all supposed to react? But I'm going to let you go. You don't got to comment on that. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. And be sure to check out more of the best clips from Speak For Yourself or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.